Hey guys, and welcome to a slightly overdue episode of Let's Max Warframe. Today we're going to say sod it and throw our primary weapon at the enemy by taking a look at the Javlok. The Javlok is the latest addition to the ever-growing arsenal of weapons to be included in clan tech, with the weapon needing to be researched in the Grenier lab in the dojo. Research costs, they're not terrible, however to build the weapon, you're going to need some of the Javlok capacitors that drop from the now slightly beefier prosecutors. Best place I found to get them so far is the Mobile Defense Mission on series, which is Kiste. That seems to have a decent amount of prosecutors that spawn, but even then, RNG will be RNG. So what do you get from the weapon when it's built? Well, you've got a weapon with a base damage of 235 pure heat damage on its primary attack, which is actually pretty damn high. Its supplemental stats are pretty decent as well. 20% crit, 200% multiplier, 25% status chance as well, so it's all looking pretty damn good right now. Well, it does have some very noticeable downsides. It's got a charge time on every single shot, only 6 shots in the magazine, and then a 2.2 second reload every 6 shots as well. The primary fire also has no AoE to it whatsoever, despite looking like it should, so you have to hit each enemy directly with it, and the travel speed of the projectile, while not being the slowest that we have in the game, it's also not particularly fast, so that hurts any long range potential that this weapon has. All of these things can be fixed with the use of mods, but every single stat that you have to try and rectify with other mods is damage that you are losing, and that hurts the high end potential of the weapon. It does have a secondary fire as well though, where you effectively just give up shooting at the enemy and decide you're just going to throw the weapon at the enemy instead. This seems to do around 300 heat damage in a roughly 5 meter radius. Now, you know explosives in Warframe, what they're like. It's very hard to test the numbers exactly, and the UI tells you nothing. I am going to come straight out with the major downside of the secondary fire, self-damage. That's right, we have another self-damaging weapon. Huzzah! The secondary fire, though, does have 2 ways of throwing it. You can tap the secondary fire for a quick throw, has a very steep arc that doesn't actually go very far, and you can hold it for a much harder throw that goes quite a bit further. The tap fire has a high chance of killing yourself, so be aware of that. But once you've thrown the weapon, you either have to manually go get it, which can get a little bit annoying after a while, or you can rely on your secondary weapons for the next 20 seconds, by which point it does come back to you. It's important to realise as well that Split Chamber has no effect on the secondary fire mode, neither does Argon Scope, because as soon as you throw it, you're not counted as aiming anymore, so the mod will absolutely do nothing for you once it leaves your hands. In terms of builds, I've got 2 main builds, one for throwing almost exclusively and one for a little bit of quality of life and a sort of good mix of the throwing and the primary fire. Both builds need 3 former, all of which are V polarities. First one's a little bit of quality of life. We've got Serration Split Chamber because that does work on the primary fire, a Bane mod for the faction you're fighting, Prime Fast Hands for reload speed because you're going to be reloading pretty often with only 6 shots in your mag, Point Strike Vital Sense for increasing our crit, 2 dual stat elementals for status chance, and an elemental combo of your choosing. This is a very decent all around build, lots of damage here. Then you've got Prime Fast Hands for quality of life for reload. You could always swap Prime Fast Hands for Vile Acceleration for charge speed, and you can use Terminal Velocity for projectile speed. In fact, against the Orokin enemies, I do switch to Bane for the Vile Acceleration because Bane doesn't do anything, and the quicker charge speed on both primary and secondary fire is quite nice. You could also use Argon Scope for more crit chance for the primary fire, or Bladed Round for more crit damage on both the primary and secondary fire. I found the Bane mod to be way more effective than either of these, but Bladed Rounds would be the best option out of these 2 to replace a Bane for if you want to go pure damage. Never go with heavy caliber on here because it takes the weapon from 100 accuracy down to 1.7, because that is totally a 55% reduction in accuracy, right? But what that actually means is that you throw the weapon with heavy caliber on, it's so inaccurate you may as well be throwing it as a 90-degree angle. It's definitely not worth it, don't go for it. But as you can see, there's actually a decent amount you can do here to be able to customise your build to suit your own needs. The second one is for purely the secondary fire. It's almost the same as the first build, but one very large change. No Split Chamber. As I explained earlier, Split Chamber does nothing on the secondary fire whatsoever. So this time we've got Serration, Prime Bane, or another 60% elemental if you want it. Those 2 are sort of interchangeable. Point Strike, Vital Sense for crit, Terminal Velocity for flight speed, Firestorm for making the explosion larger. Be careful because this is pretty hazardous to your own frame's health. And then another 2 60% mods. What this means is that the explosion does a load of damage already, but you can turn this into effectively an AoE status proc with something like Viral, for example. So you throw this AoE Viral proc, then finish any of them off that didn't die to the explosion with your secondary weapons. This does sacrifice a fair amount of damage on the primary fire to do so. So do I think it's worth the time, effort and resources in taking and maxing out this weapon? And honestly, it's a sort of twofold answer. The weapon does do good damage. You can see me killing reasonably well in the footage in the background, which is a Kuva Flood mission because the Salty wasn't great for showing this off today. Heat combines well into builds for most factions, whether it be Corrosive Heat, Radiation Viral, whatever basically. The status, honestly, is a side note for the primary fire. It's a decent for AoE status procs, but because of the low fire rate on the primary fire, it's not worth being... It's not really a status spreader from that point of view. So if you like the weapon, you can take it into sorties. It's going to struggle a little bit against the enemies that have a lot of armor, but the same can be said about 90% of weapons. And I know I'm on Nova in the footage, that is double damage, but it's actually not a fully built Javlok at this point either. It's my lower level build for the quality of life mods. There's a load of quality of life mods on this at the moment while I was testing. So dealing with Salty 3 level enemies, you're going to start to struggle at the top end, but for the most part it's going to be okay. Granted, at this level I was starting to struggle a little bit, but for the most part, while it wasn't killing in great quantities, it was still killing reasonably well, which a lot of weapons just get nowhere near to this level. Right now though, I personally don't really like the weapon, to be honest. The 50% crit feels too hit or miss to me. It's either kill or don't kill, depending on whether you crit or you don't crit, especially at the higher level. And let's be honest here, it doesn't have the fire rate to deal with that kind of hit or miss gameplay, like something like, for example, the Prisma Gorgon does, where a crit build works because the rate of fire sort of deals with that crit or not crit kind of gameplay. The charge mechanic on the primary fire just feels kind of clunky to me. Reloading a staff just feels downright weird. I'm not really a fan of... I don't know, how can I put this? How bland the primary fire is. Okay, the weapon itself looks great. It is a really good looking weapon. The fireball it fires does as well. But that's all that's going on. There's no animation going on while you're charging. No real recoil to give you any idea you just fired a giant fireball out in front of the weapon. And the lack of splash damage from the primary fire fireball just doesn't make any sense to me. It all adds up for the primary fire being kind of underwhelming. The secondary fire though, I absolutely love. It's funny to just fire your magazine and instead of reloading, just say sod it, throw it at them and use the secondaries instead. That kind of gameplay is a laugh, even if it is very buggy right now and you've got a high chance of blowing yourself up. Throwing this at a nullifier, getting it stuck in his bubble, killing the nullifier before you pick it up, is actually going to cause the weapon to disappear completely for that 20-second timer, for example. Plus, then you've got the chance of throwing it to somewhere where you just can't get to it anymore and you've got to wait for it to return. Or you're going to get it back and you won't be able to switch to it. Or sometimes it's going to auto-switch you when you're trying to do something else with your secondary weapons. The secondary fire mode for this thing is incredibly buggy right now, but it is very, very fun. Also, just make sure that when you're using the weapon on its own, so you don't have a secondary weapon or a melee equipped, if you've only got that primary equipped and throw it away, you're going to have no weapon until you pick it up again, which actually can be a bit of a problem. Perhaps the situation will change a bit when it gets added to the Riven Pool, because it's not in it right now, but perhaps you can fix some of its faults that way. Don't get me wrong, the damage it does is decent, and if you're not someone that thinks that killing more enemies than the rest of the team actually matters that much, you might enjoy this. It's kind of fun still, even though the primary fire is, in my opinion, quite bland. It's got decent synergies with some frames. Ivara's Navigator controls both the primary and the secondary fire. Vauban's Vortex puts them all into one place for the explosion to work wonders. Jetstream Zephyr for flight speed. That's just to name a few of the synergies that work hugely well with the Javlok. To be honest though, this is a weapon that's going to be loved to death by some, disliked by others. It's not a bad weapon, honestly, it's really not, but it's not one that I personally enjoyed. What do you think of it? Have you got your hands on it so far? Are you enjoying it, and are you messing about it within sorties? Have you tried it in the sorties yet? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all very much for watching though, and I shall see you in the next video.